around just adding a little more detail to the discussion. So I'm sort of a weird human mid-roll here. So in terms of, and certainly for the last 20, 25 years or so, a big focus has been in terms of managing in and around all things human or non-human traffic, right? So certainly in terms of advertising in particular, you ultimately are marketing to humans, and whilst we know there's great value in some of the benevolent non-human traffic, there's also considerations around what's known as invalid traffic, or even worse, sophisticated invalid traffic, which is basically linked to fraud and crime. But increasingly, with the change in terms of volume, it's also the type of non-human traffic that I wanted to dig into a little bit more. Because traditionally, obviously, we are ultimately, and where we talked about emotion, and Karen talked about it so well, we want to message humans, we want to impress upon humans, get them to remember some stuff, hopefully do some stuff, even better buy some stuff, or at least feel an emotion, which is sometimes very hard to measure. But in terms of what's happening with non-human traffic, it's slightly different. So we have tried to provide a little bit of guidance, and we've produced an online sort of framework and guidance around the different details related to the different types of bots and crawlers as they proliferate. And it's not only the volume, it's the categorization and type of them. We know the experience is changing, but the way the crawlers are being managed and delivered across pages is also changing slightly, and that has, whilst it's a nuance, it has an important practical element when you're looking to have some transparency over what's hitting your pages, try and have some control over what you do want to let in or you don't want to let in, and what the sort of bargain, what the value exchange is in doing so. So the devil is in the detail, and rather than me waffling on for half an hour about it, we thought, go to a page and you can review what that looks like. There's also an important change in terms of the controls. What is now just essentially, consider it as a polite request, where you have a robots.txt file that sits at your root domain. That used to be something fairly strictly adhered to. That's no longer the case. It's treated inconsistently. Some of the bigger end of town is actually ignoring it altogether. So there's an enforcement element, probably best utilized through vendors, whether that's CDNs or whether it's web application firewalls that give you the controls, and there's an interesting change that's coming that's important to understand, just so you can make the right decision depending upon what you want to do, your content and your strategies. So we do know about the changes, excellent conversations prior to kind of set that all up. I mean, in essence, again, there's an inconsistency in terms of not only the type of crawlers, but the organizations behind them have very different underlying philosophies in terms of how they will ingest and the amount of times you might get traffic back. It's not what it was. It's a completely new formula that you need to take into consideration. If you look at the sheer number of actual bots, in one database I looked at yesterday is like over 600. So different technologies and vendors and different organizations may categorize them differently. You can take pictures if you want, but to be honest, the guidance online is going to be far more useful, and you will get these slides anyway, because all the information on the guidance is a lot deeper, I'd like to think. And actually listening particularly to Adrian and Renee there, it makes me think I need to add a little bit more to it, actually, as I go along in terms of how you go about building out that transparency. There I am going on a tangent already. Sorry, guys. But the way we went about it is utilizing the IAB Tech Labs guidance through a project I'm going to refer to a little bit at the end. But more importantly, they produced really good specific guidance around crawler types, and even a little bit of a sort of start of a framework about how to go about it. So we really built upon that. We've kind of given it a little more human language in terms of the different types. Being probably too nice to category E there, calling them imposters. We could say a lot worse, but it's down to you how you treat them. This is a guidance to give you a starting place to kind of, do your own research and do your own work. Ultimately, what we've built online has a lot more detail. I've kind of thrown in as many examples as I can in a longer list further down that you can review. That others are available, but even included sort of global ones that you might not necessarily think about, but they're still hitting your pages, like Yandex from Russia and random Korean ones. They are massive globally, and you'll be seeing them when you filter through. There's also a starting point in terms of, this isn't guidance. This is, I suppose, a template for you to start. Objectively, this is something one might do as a publisher. with content, or one might do with a content owner as a brand. It's just a starting point. What you do is down to you, but it's a guidance place for you to kind of start. And there's also a sort of a framework set there with a little more detail where you can kind of start, and you and your teams can start looking at it and deciding what your strategy is. It's probably something that's already in place, but we just wanted to provide something that's tangible and meaningful to both kind of techies and commercial types. So one thing that feels like a nuance that's worth considering, there's a very good technical reason to have multi-purpose crawlers. There's a very, for a consumer experience and in terms of technology being more efficient and effective, bundling up the various different types of agents or crawlers into one makes sense. But those companies that are looking, and it's particularly true of Cloudflare, who've been really open about this, they believe in being able to split it out very clearly. Because currently, if you block one type, you may unknowingly, and the unintended consequence could be incredibly negative of you blocking all of them. So that is an element of controls that certainly vendors of this type will want to provide. This is how Cloudflare splits it out in terms of capabilities. And the important thing is, from mid-September, they're changing the defaults. Not only are you getting increased capabilities to be able to block or allow based upon how they categorize things, but importantly, the defaults are changing that could have a massive consequence if you're not across it, so plan ahead for it, please. But ultimately, we just want to be able to provide you with the visibility, understand what's going on, what's hitting your pages, have a plan around it, build out a process, have the right teams on it, a good old RASCI to project manage it properly so you know who's doing what and all the rest of it. And that's the reason that we just wanted to sort of chuck me up here and get you thinking about it. The underlying protocols sit with this. So this was a project IAB Tech Lab launched a couple of years ago. It is actually mainly a consideration for publishers. That was the underlying sort of DNA of this, where there's essentially, if there's a drop in traffic, let's face it, that sort of disintermediates the traditional model of advertising, eyeballs that you convert through ads. So what are the controls that you might have to be able to control or have some rules around what you allow in and what you don't, which is exactly what I was talking about. It's just that this came out so early that it was literally like, right, block them and have a cost per crawl mechanism perhaps, and let's do it that way. That's just one way of going about it. They've built it out with expanded guidance, which we've really leveraged, including sort of frameworks and ways to go about it depending upon subjectively what it is you want to do as an organization. And that was really, really valuable. That was a recent update. But what's interesting now, and it's worth thinking about, is that kind of licensing discussion that we're starting to hear more and more, particularly from regulatory and governments all around the world. And it's interesting that 18 months ago, 2 years ago, Tech Lab sort of came out with something of a framework that we can start looking at, and perhaps this is something that will gain more traction, and how we utilize that as an industry is something to be considered. But most importantly of all, please have a look at the guidance, see what you think. Feedback, we love feedback. We've shared it around with a few councils, presented it to the data crew yesterday, actually. And as I said, the more and more I listened to the previous session, the more and more I thought, oh, I wouldn't mind actually providing a whole set of different tools, including enterprise, so you can go and look yourself, discover it yourself. Maybe I do a little video of doing it, so you can get an example of exactly what we're talking about, so you see it not just as conceptual, but sort of in real life, as it were. That is it from me. Have I managed within time? I might have done, I don't know.